Good morning to you. Years ago, a news broadcaster by the name of Paul Harvey had a news program and he used this special phrase, the rest of the story, as his byline. He would describe a situation and at the end of his newscast, he would tell the outcome or the rest of the story. I want to take Paul Harvey's idea and apply it to some of the encounters that Jesus had during his ministry. For example, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the grave, the full story is told in John 11. John says that the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Then what? Where or what is the rest of the story? I have suggested in another writing that Lazarus might have come over and hugged Jesus, spoken to him, and said some special words of thanks and gratitude. Did it happen? Is that a part of the rest of the story? Lazarus might have turned and spoken to the crowd, especially to his sisters, or some of the chief priests and scribes. And what might he have said? I would like to know what happened really, what happened then. But we do not know the rest of the story. What kind of a story might have gone out about the raising? What would the newspapers of the day, if the world had had newspapers at that day, how would this miracle be described in the paper? What is the rest of the story? Or let's look at another story from John's Gospel. In chapter 8, he tells the story of a woman taken in the very act of adultery, being brought by the scribes and the Pharisees to Jesus for his decision about what should be done to her, especially noting for him what the Old Testament commanded to be done: stone her to death. And they put Jesus on the spot with this very specifically and intentionally confrontive question: what do you say? Jesus bends down and writes something in the sand, we don't know what. When they kept on questioning him, Jesus stood up and said these challenging words: let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to cast or throw a stone at her. He bends down again and writes, and we don't have any idea what he wrote. The accusers went away one by one, beginning with the eldest. When Jesus is left alone with the woman, he asks, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one," she responds. Then Jesus spoke these forgiving words: "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." And what is the rest of the story? We have questions galore. What did the accusers do with this event, encounter, in their own religious thinking? Did it change any of the chief priests or the scribes or anybody? Each had to make a decision about his own sin and think through the extremely confrontive challenge Jesus makes to him. Let him who is without sin among you cast the first stone. Did it change their thinking about the Old Testament and its rules and punishments? Did they really look at him and sin from a wholly different perspective from this encounter? How did they view Jesus from this point on? What is the rest of the story? And what about the woman? Forgiven and not condemned? No punishment from the scribes and Pharisees? And no punishment from this man who has, by his own declaration, forgiven her actions and her sin? What did she say then to Jesus? Would Jesus have given this woman a hug and spoken some special words to her, perhaps in an aside? Does she just walk away without a spoken word to him? For goodness sakes, what is the rest of this story? Come on, writer John, the bearer of the good news. Does it make a dramatic difference in her life? Was she a changed woman? Did she change herself? Let's hear the rest of the story, please, John. There are any number of encounters that describe dramatic and traumatic events in the lives of persons. Healings, raisings, cleansings, miracles. What happens to all these people when Jesus empowers them in his special way for a new life? What is the rest of the story? For goodness sake, tell us the rest of the story. And what about us when we consider what Jesus has done for our lives? When we felt Christ's forgiveness, or when we feel Christ's forgiveness today, what is the rest of our story? Well, you and I are still in the process of writing our story, aren't we? Bless us this day as we continue to write our story each day of our lives. Amen.